In 1943, near El Paso, artillery captain Daniel Rodriguez vanished, and for 81 years his family asked only one question: where did our son go that desert night? In 2024, bones discovered during border wall construction provided the answer to this question, but the truth that emerged was not the kind of answer the family had ever expected. Because Daniel Rodriguez hadn't just disappeared, he was the Soviet Union's first victim on American soil. Before diving into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated with the latest cold case revelations. The scorching summer of 1943 brought unprecedented activity to the remote desert regions surrounding El Paso, Texas, where the vast expanse of the Chihuahuan Desert stretched endlessly toward the horizon in every direction. In one of the most desolate and forbidding landscapes in North America, the United States Army had established a series of classified testing facilities designed to develop and perfect the advanced artillery systems that would soon rain destruction upon Axis forces across multiple theaters of the global conflict that was reshaping the world. Fort Bliss, the massive military installation that dominated the El Paso region, had expanded dramatically since Pearl Harbor, transforming from a modest border garrison into one of America's most crucial weapons development centers. The fort's remote location, combined with the vast uninhabited spaces of the surrounding desert, made it ideal for testing experimental artillery pieces, new ammunition types, and innovative targeting systems that required both secrecy and safety distances that could only be achieved in the emptiness of the Texas borderland. The desert environment itself was harsh and unforgiving, characterized by extreme temperatures that could reach 115 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and drop to near freezing at night. The landscape was dominated by sparse vegetation, consisting mainly of creosote bushes, prickly pear cacti, and scattered mesquite trees that provided little shelter from the relentless sun or the occasional sandstorms that could reduce visibility to mere feet and strip paint from vehicles caught in the open. Despite these challenging conditions, the military advantages of the El Paso region were undeniable. The vast open spaces allowed for long-range artillery testing that would have been impossible in more populated areas, while the consistent weather patterns and clear atmospheric conditions provided ideal circumstances for evaluating the accuracy and effectiveness of new weapon systems. The proximity to the Mexican border also provided opportunities for cooperation with Mexican military authorities and access to additional testing ranges south of the Rio Grande. Among the officers assigned to these highly classified weapons testing programs was Captain Daniel Rodriguez, a 28-year-old artillery specialist from San Antonio, whose technical expertise and analytical mind had marked him as one of the Army's most promising young officers. Rodriguez possessed the rare combination of theoretical knowledge and practical experience that made him invaluable in the development of new weapon systems, and his ability to translate complex technical concepts into operational procedures had earned him rapid promotion and assignment to increasingly sensitive projects. Rodriguez's background reflected the complex cultural heritage of the Texas borderland, where Mexican, Anglo, and Native American influences had blended over centuries to create a unique regional identity. The son of Mexican immigrants who had arrived in Texas during the Revolution of 1910, Rodriguez embodied the American dream of advancement through education, hard work, and military service. His father, Miguel Rodriguez, had worked as a railroad laborer, while his mother, Carmen, had taken in laundry to support the family and ensure that their children could attend school and pursue opportunities that had been denied to previous generations. The Rodriguez family had arrived in San Antonio during one of the most turbulent periods in Mexican history, fleeing the violence and economic disruption that characterized the revolutionary period from 1910 to 1920. Like thousands of other Mexican families, they had crossed the Rio Grande, seeking safety and opportunity in the United States, carrying with them little more than their determination to build better lives for their children. Miguel Rodriguez had found work with the Southern Pacific Railroad, laying track and maintaining rail lines that connected the Texas borderland to the broader American economy. The work was hard and dangerous, requiring long hours in extreme weather conditions for wages that barely supported his growing family. But Miguel understood that his sacrifices were investments in his children's futures, and he was determined that they would have opportunities that his own education and circumstances had denied him. Carmen Rodriguez had supplemented the family income by taking in laundry from more prosperous families in San Antonio, working long hours, washing and ironing clothes, while also caring for her own children and maintaining the small house that Miguel had been able to purchase in one of the city's Mexican-American neighborhoods. Despite the demands of her work, Carmen had insisted that all of her children attend school regularly and had helped them with their homework each evening, determined that education would be their pathway to success in American society. Daniel had been an exceptional student from an early age, displaying both the mathematical aptitude that would later serve him well in artillery calculations and the leadership qualities that would mark him for advancement in military service. His teachers had recognized his potential and had encouraged him to pursue higher education, despite the financial challenges that college would represent for a working-class Mexican-American family in the 1930s. The scholarship that Daniel had earned to study engineering at the University of Texas represented the culmination of his family's sacrifices and his own academic achievements. At the university, he had excelled in mathematics, physics, and engineering courses, while also participating in the Reserve Officers Training Corps program that would prepare him for military service. His professors had noted his ability to grasp complex technical concepts quickly and to apply theoretical knowledge to practical problems, skills that would prove invaluable in his later military career. Daniel's decision to accept a commission in the Army upon graduation in 1938 had been motivated by both patriotic duty and practical considerations. The military offered opportunities for advancement and professional development that might not have been available to a Mexican American in civilian life, while also providing a chance to serve his adopted country and prove that immigrants and their children could contribute meaningfully to American society. His bilingual abilities and deep understanding of Mexican culture made him particularly valuable in the border region, where cooperation with Mexican authorities was essential for maintaining security during wartime conditions. Daniel could communicate effectively with Mexican officials, understand cultural nuances that might affect military operations, and serve as a liaison between American military personnel and local civilian populations, whose support was crucial for successful operations. The weapons testing program to which Rodriguez had been assigned was part of a larger effort to develop artillery systems capable of supporting the massive amphibious invasions that would be required to defeat Japan and establish a second front in Europe. These systems needed to be accurate, reliable, and capable of delivering devastating firepower against heavily fortified positions while being transportable across oceans and deployable on beaches under enemy fire. The technical challenges involved in developing such weapons were enormous, requiring advances in metallurgy, ballistics, communications, and targeting systems that pushed the boundaries of 1940s technology. Artillery pieces needed to be lightweight enough for rapid deployment, but powerful enough to destroy concrete fortifications. Ammunition had to be reliable after months of storage in tropical climates, and accurate enough to hit specific targets at ranges of 10 miles or more. Rodriguez's specific responsibility involved the development of new targeting systems that would allow artillery units to engage enemy positions with unprecedented accuracy, even under conditions of poor visibility or electronic interference. This work required him to have access to some of the most closely guarded military secrets of the war, including classified information about radar technology, ballistic calculations, and communication systems that would give American forces crucial advantages in future battles. The targeting systems that Rodriguez was helping to develop represented revolutionary advances in military technology, incorporating early forms of electronic computation, improved optical instruments, and sophisticated mathematical models that could account for variables such as wind speed, temperature, humidity, and the rotation of the Earth. These systems would eventually allow single artillery pieces to accomplish what had previously required entire batteries, dramatically increasing the effectiveness of American firepower while reducing the number of personnel and equipment needed for military operations. What made Rodriguez particularly valuable to the weapons development program was not just his technical expertise, but his ability to think creatively about tactical applications of new technologies. He had already contributed to several breakthrough innovations in artillery deployment and had been selected to work on projects that would not see operational use until the planned invasions of Japan, still more than a year in the future. The security measures surrounding the Fort Bliss testing program were extensive, reflecting both the sensitive nature of the work being conducted and the proximity to the Mexican border, which created additional opportunities for enemy infiltration and espionage. All personnel assigned to the program underwent thorough background investigations, and access to classified information was strictly controlled through a compartmentalized system that limited each individual's knowledge to only those aspects of the program directly relevant to their specific responsibilities. The background investigations that preceded assignment to classified programs were particularly thorough for personnel of foreign birth or with family connections to other countries. Rodriguez had undergone multiple interviews and investigations that examined not only his own background and activities, but also those of his parents, siblings, and extended family members. Investigators had contacted his former teachers, employers, and neighbors to verify the information he had provided and to ensure that there were no hidden connections to foreign governments or subversive organizations. Despite these extensive security measures, the program had attracted the attention of foreign intelligence services seeking to gather information about American weapons development and potentially disrupt the progress being made toward new artillery systems that could affect the outcome of the war. Both German and Japanese intelligence operations were known to be active in the border region, taking advantage of the area's complex ethnic composition and history of cross-border movement to establish networks of agents and informants. German intelligence services had been operating in Mexico since before the war, attempting to recreate the successful submarine campaign of World War I by establishing bases and supply networks in Mexican ports. These operations had been largely unsuccessful due to Mexican government cooperation with American authorities, but they had created an infrastructure of agents and contacts that could potentially be used for intelligence gathering and sabotage operations against American military installations. Japanese intelligence had also established operations in Mexico and the American Southwest, focusing primarily on gathering information about American military capabilities and attempting to organize sabotage operations against defense industries and transportation networks. These operations had achieved some limited success in gathering intelligence, but had been largely ineffective in conducting significant sabotage due to the vigilance of American counterintelligence services and the cooperation of local law enforcement agencies. What American intelligence services did not realize was that a third foreign power had also established operations in the El Paso region, one whose presence was far more surprising and potentially more dangerous than the expected German and Japanese activities. The Soviet Union, despite being officially allied with the United States against the Axis powers, had been conducting its own intelligence-gathering operations on American soil, driven by Stalin's paranoid suspicions about American intentions and his determination to position the Soviet Union advantageously for the post-war world. The Soviet intelligence operations in the United States during World War II were far more extensive and sophisticated than American authorities realized at the time. These operations were motivated not only by immediate military considerations, but also by long-term strategic planning for the post-war period when the wartime alliance would inevitably end and the United States and Soviet Union would become rivals for global influence. Stalin's intelligence services had correctly anticipated that the United States would emerge from the war as the world's dominant military and economic power, possessing technological capabilities and industrial capacity that would give it enormous advantages in any future conflict. Soviet intelligence was therefore tasked with gathering as much information as possible about American military technology, industrial processes, and strategic planning, while the wartime alliance provided cover for these activities. The Soviet intelligence operation in the El Paso region was part of a larger network that had been established throughout the American Southwest, taking advantage of the area's large population of Mexican immigrants and seasonal workers to place agents who could move freely across the border and blend seamlessly into local communities. These agents were tasked not only with gathering intelligence about American military capabilities, but also with identifying potential opportunities for sabotage and assassination that could disrupt American war production and military development. The network of Soviet agents operating in the American Southwest was remarkably sophisticated, incorporating both professional intelligence officers who had been trained in Moscow and local recruits who had been convinced to cooperate with Soviet intelligence for ideological or financial reasons. The professional officers provided leadership and coordination for the network, while local recruits provided access to specific facilities and information that would have been difficult for outsiders to obtain. Among the Soviet agents operating in the El Paso area was a man who called himself Carlos Mendoza, though that name, like almost everything else about his background, was a carefully constructed fiction. Mendoza's real name was Dmitri Volkov, and he was a captain in the NKVD, the Soviet secret police who had been trained specifically for deep cover operations in foreign countries. Volkov's background and training represented the pinnacle of Soviet intelligence tradecraft, incorporating not only traditional espionage skills but also advanced psychological techniques and cultural preparation that allowed him to assume false identities and operate for extended periods without detection. His preparation for the American mission had taken more than 2 years and had included intensive language training, cultural immersion, and the creation of an elaborate false identity that could withstand detailed investigation. The false identity that had been created for Volkov was that of Carlos Mendoza, the son of Mexican parents who had died in the influenza pandemic of 1918 to 1919, leaving their young son to be raised by relatives in a remote village in the state of Sonora. According to the fabricated story, Mendoza had received only elementary education before being forced to work to support himself, eventually making his way north to the United States in search of better economic opportunities. The creation of this false identity had required extensive research into Mexican genealogical records, cultural practices, and regional dialects that would allow Volkov to pass as a genuine Mexican immigrant. Soviet intelligence services had recruited Mexican Communist Party members to provide detailed information about specific villages and families that could serve as the basis for the cover story, and had even arranged for forged documents to be inserted into Mexican government records to support the false identity. Volkov had arrived in El Paso in early 1942, ostensibly as one of thousands of Mexican workers who had come north seeking employment in the wartime economy. His cover identity was that of a skilled laborer who had experience in construction and mechanical work, trades that provided him with legitimate reasons to seek employment at military installations and defense facilities throughout the region. The timing of Volkov's arrival had been carefully planned to coincide with the massive expansion of military facilities in the El Paso region following Pearl Harbor, when the demand for construction workers and skilled laborers was at its peak, and when security screening procedures were still being developed and refined. This timing allowed Volkov to establish himself in the community and gain employment at military facilities before more rigorous security measures were implemented. What made Volkov particularly dangerous was not just his intelligence training and language skills, but his ability to blend completely into the Mexican-American community of El Paso. He spoke Spanish fluently with the appropriate regional dialect, understood Mexican customs and culture intimately, and had even adopted the religious practices and social behaviors that would allow him to participate fully in community life without arousing suspicion. Volkov's integration into the Mexican-American community of El Paso was so complete that he was accepted as a genuine member of the community by neighbors, co-workers, and even local religious and political leaders who had extensive experience in identifying outsiders and potential threats. His ability to pass as a Mexican immigrant was crucial to the success of his mission, as it provided him with access to employment opportunities and social networks that would have been impossible for a more obvious foreign agent to penetrate. The employment that Volkov obtained at Fort Bliss and other military facilities in the region provided him with legitimate access to areas where sensitive military activities were conducted, while his position as a construction worker and maintenance technician allowed him to observe military operations, equipment, and personnel without attracting attention. His work assignments took him throughout the base complex, giving him opportunities to observe activities and gather information that would have been impossible for someone without authorized access to obtain. Volkov's mission in El Paso was part of Stalin's broader strategy of positioning the Soviet Union to take advantage of American technological developments once the war ended. Soviet leadership recognized that the United States was developing weapons and technologies that would give it enormous advantages in any future conflict, and they were determined to acquire as much information as possible about these developments before the wartime alliance ended and the two superpowers became rivals. The specific intelligence that Moscow was seeking from the Fort Bliss operations included detailed information about American artillery technology, radar systems, communications equipment, and any other innovations that could be adapted for Soviet use or countered through defensive measures. Volkov's assignment was to gather this intelligence through whatever means necessary, including the recruitment of American personnel who could provide access to classified information. The intelligence requirements that Volkov had received from Moscow were extremely detailed and specific, reflecting the high level of knowledge that Soviet intelligence services already possessed about American military research and development programs. The requirements included not only general information about weapons capabilities and performance, but also detailed technical specifications, manufacturing processes, and strategic planning documents that would allow Soviet military planners to develop effective countermeasures and competing technologies. The sophistication of these intelligence requirements demonstrated that the Soviet Union was already thinking beyond the immediate wartime cooperation with the United States to the post-war period when the two nations would inevitably become rivals. Soviet intelligence services were laying the groundwork for future conflicts by gathering information that would be crucial for maintaining strategic parity with the United States in the decades to come. Volkov had been operating successfully for more than a year when he first became aware of Captain Rodriguez and the weapons testing program to which he had been assigned. Through careful observation and cultivation of sources within the Mexican-American community that provided labor for various military construction projects, Volkov had learned about the classified artillery testing being conducted in the desert and had identified Rodriguez as a key figure in these operations. The process of identifying and targeting Rodriguez had required months of careful surveillance and intelligence gathering. Volkov had to learn about Rodriguez's background, responsibilities, personal habits, and psychological profile before developing an approach strategy that would maximize the chances of successful recruitment while minimizing the risk of exposure or detection. Volkov's initial assessment of Rodriguez had identified both opportunities and challenges for a potential recruitment operation. On the positive side, Rodriguez's Mexican heritage and family background provided potential leverage points that could be exploited to encourage cooperation with Soviet intelligence. Volkov could potentially appeal to Rodriguez's ethnic identity, his concerns about discrimination against Mexican Americans, or his family's experiences as immigrants seeking better opportunities in the United States. However, Volkov's assessment had also identified significant obstacles to recruitment, including Rodriguez's strong religious beliefs, his commitment to military service, and his apparent satisfaction with his career prospects and social status in American society. These factors suggested that Rodriguez would be unlikely to betray his oath of service for financial or ideological reasons, making any recruitment attempt extremely risky. The initial phase of Volkov's operation against Rodriguez involved what intelligence services call development, the gradual process of making contact, building trust, and identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited to turn the target into a source of information. Volkov's approach to Rodriguez was indirect, working through intermediaries and social connections rather than making direct contact that might arouse suspicion. Volkov's strategy for approaching Rodriguez was based on his understanding of the close-knit nature of the Mexican-American community in El Paso, where family connections, religious affiliations, and shared cultural experiences created networks of mutual support and obligation that could be exploited by a skilled intelligence officer. Volkov began by identifying individuals within the community who had connections to Rodriguez or his family, and then positioned himself to meet these intermediaries in natural social settings. The cultivation of these intermediary contacts required considerable time and patience, as Volkov had to establish his own credentials within the community before he could expect to gain access to individuals who were connected to Rodriguez. This process involved participating in community events, attending religious services, and gradually building relationships with people who could eventually provide introductions to Rodriguez or members of his family. Volkov's breakthrough came when he learned that Rodriguez regularly visited his extended family in the Mexican-American neighborhoods of El Paso, and that these visits followed predictable patterns that created opportunities for seemingly accidental encounters. Volkov began frequenting the same restaurants, shops, and social venues that Rodriguez visited, gradually becoming a familiar face in the community and establishing the foundation for eventual direct contact. The restaurants and social venues that Rodriguez frequented were primarily located in the Segundo Barrio, El Paso's oldest Mexican-American neighborhood, which was situated just across the Rio Grande from Ciudad Juarez and maintained strong cultural and family connections to Mexico. This neighborhood served as the heart of Mexican-American life in El Paso, providing a sense of community and cultural continuity for immigrants and their descendants who were navigating the challenges of life in American society. The social dynamics of the Segundo Barrio were complex, reflecting the diverse experiences and perspectives of residents who ranged from recent immigrants to families who had lived in the area for generations. Some residents maintained strong connections to Mexico and viewed themselves primarily as Mexicans living temporarily in the United States, while others had embraced American identity and saw themselves as Americans of Mexican heritage. These different perspectives created both opportunities and challenges for someone like Volkov, who was attempting to infiltrate the community. Volkov's success in establishing himself within the Segundo Barrio community was facilitated by his careful study of Mexican culture and his ability to present himself as someone who shared the experiences and challenges faced by other Mexican immigrants. He portrayed himself as a hard-working man who had come north seeking better opportunities for himself and his family, a story that resonated with the experiences of many community members who had made similar journeys. The first direct interaction between Volkov and Rodriguez occurred at a church social event in June 1943, where Volkov had positioned himself to meet Rodriguez through mutual acquaintances in the community. The event was a fundraiser for families of Mexican-American soldiers serving overseas, and Rodriguez was serving as a guest of honor due to his military service and success as an officer. Volkov presented himself as a hard-working immigrant who admired Rodriguez's success in military service, expressing gratitude for the captain's role in defending America against its enemies. This approach was carefully calculated to appeal to Rodriguez's sense of responsibility as a role model for other Mexican Americans and his pride in his military service and achievements. Rodriguez, who took pride in his heritage and felt a responsibility to serve as a role model for other Mexican Americans, was receptive to Volkov's apparent admiration and willingness to discuss the challenges facing immigrants who sought to prove their loyalty and patriotism through military service. The conversation was brief and entirely innocent, but it established the foundation for a relationship that Volkov would carefully cultivate over the following months. The initial conversation between Volkov and Rodriguez focused on topics that were natural for the setting and circumstances, including the progress of the war, the contributions being made by Mexican-American soldiers, and the challenges faced by immigrant families whose sons were serving in combat. Volkov was careful to present himself as genuinely interested in these topics while avoiding any questions or comments that might suggest ulterior motives. Over the summer of 1943, Volkov gradually developed his relationship with Rodriguez through a series of carefully orchestrated encounters that appeared to be coincidental but were actually part of a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to build trust and identify opportunities for exploitation. Volkov's approach was subtle and patient, focusing on establishing himself as a trustworthy friend rather than making any immediate attempts to gather intelligence. These subsequent encounters took place in various social settings throughout the Mexican-American community, including religious services, family celebrations, and community events where Rodriguez was a respected figure. Volkov was careful to vary the locations and circumstances of these meetings to maintain the appearance of coincidence while gradually deepening his relationship with Rodriguez. Volkov's strategy was based on his understanding of Rodriguez's character and motivations, which he had learned through careful observation and research into the captain's background, family connections, and personal interests. Rodriguez was deeply religious, devoted to his family, proud of his Mexican heritage, and committed to proving that Mexican Americans could serve their adopted country with distinction and honor. The conversations between Volkov and Rodriguez during this period covered a wide range of topics, from family histories and personal experiences to discussions of military service and patriotic duty. Volkov was skilled at encouraging Rodriguez to talk about his work and responsibilities without directly asking for classified information, instead expressing general interest in military life and the challenges faced by officers in wartime. These conversations provided Volkov with valuable insights into Rodriguez's personality, motivations, and potential vulnerabilities, while also giving him general information about the structure and activities of the weapons testing program at Fort Bliss. Although Rodriguez was careful not to discuss classified information, his general comments about his work and responsibilities provided Volkov with useful intelligence about the scope and importance of the artillery development program. The turning point in Volkov's operation came in August 1943, when he learned through his network of sources that Rodriguez had been selected for a particularly sensitive assignment involving the testing of experimental artillery systems that would not be deployed until the planned invasion of Japan. This information was exactly the kind of intelligence that Moscow was seeking, and Volkov received instructions to accelerate his efforts to recruit Rodriguez as a source. The intelligence that Volkov had gathered about Rodriguez's new assignment indicated that the captain now had access to some of the most closely guarded military secrets of the war, including information about weapon systems that would give American forces crucial advantages in future battles against Japan. This access made Rodriguez an extremely high-value target for Soviet intelligence, justifying the risks involved in attempting his recruitment. The instructions that Volkov received from Moscow regarding the recruitment of Rodriguez were detailed and specific, reflecting the importance that Soviet intelligence placed on gaining access to American weapons development programs. The instructions emphasized the need for careful preparation and the development of multiple approach strategies that could be used depending on Rodriguez's initial response to recruitment attempts. The approach that Volkov used to attempt Rodriguez's recruitment was carefully designed to appeal to the captain's sense of justice and his concerns about post-war treatment of Mexican Americans and other minority communities. Volkov presented himself as a representative of an organization that was working to ensure that the sacrifices made by minority soldiers during the war would be recognized and rewarded in the post-war period. The recruitment pitch that Volkov prepared for Rodriguez was sophisticated and multi-layered, incorporating both ideological appeals and practical arguments that were designed to overcome the captain's natural reluctance to betray his oath of service. Volkov argued that information sharing between allies was not only appropriate but necessary to ensure that the Soviet Union, which was bearing the brunt of the fighting against Germany, would have access to the weapons and technologies needed to achieve final victory. Volkov's argument emphasized the idea that Rodriguez could contribute to the broader Allied cause while also advancing the interests of communities that had been historically marginalized in American society. He suggested that Soviet intelligence services were working to ensure that minority soldiers and their families would receive fair treatment in the post-war world, and that Rodriguez's cooperation could help to secure better opportunities for Mexican Americans and other minority groups. The meeting at which Volkov made his recruitment attempt took place at a restaurant in El Paso that was frequented by members of the Mexican-American community, a location that Volkov had chosen because it would appear natural for the two men to meet there and because the background noise and activity would make surveillance difficult for any American counterintelligence agents who might be monitoring their activities. Rodriguez's response to Volkov's recruitment attempt was immediate and unambiguous. He rejected the proposal completely and made it clear that he considered any sharing of classified information with unauthorized persons to be an act of treason, regardless of the justifications that might be offered. Rodriguez's loyalty to the United States was absolute, and he was deeply offended by the suggestion that he might betray his oath as an officer and his duty to his country. The confrontation between Rodriguez and Volkov was brief but intense, with Rodriguez making it clear that he understood exactly what Volkov was proposing and that he would never consider cooperating with any foreign intelligence service. Rodriguez's response demonstrated not only his personal integrity but also his sophisticated understanding of intelligence operations and the threats they posed to American security. Rodriguez's rejection of the recruitment attempt immediately transformed the situation from an intelligence operation into a security crisis for Volkov and the broader Soviet intelligence network operating in the El Paso region. Volkov realized that Rodriguez not only would not cooperate with Soviet intelligence, but that he represented an active threat to the entire network of operations in the American Southwest. The knowledge that Rodriguez had gained about Volkov's true identity and mission created an unacceptable risk for the Soviet intelligence operation. If Rodriguez reported his contact with Volkov to American counterintelligence services, the resulting investigation would almost certainly expose not only Volkov himself, but also the broader network of Soviet agents operating throughout the region. Volkov's training and experience in intelligence operations had prepared him for the possibility that recruitment attempts might fail, but the specific circumstances of Rodriguez's rejection created particularly serious risks that required immediate action. Rodriguez was not only refusing to cooperate, but his military position and security clearances meant that his report of the recruitment attempt would be taken seriously by American authorities and would trigger intensive counterintelligence investigations. The assessment that Volkov conducted following Rodriguez's rejection concluded that the captain represented an existential threat to Soviet intelligence operations in the region, and that this threat could only be eliminated through Rodriguez's death. The assassination would need to be accomplished in a way that would not arouse suspicion about foreign intelligence involvement, and it would need to be done quickly before Rodriguez had an opportunity to alert his superiors about the attempted recruitment. The decision to eliminate Rodriguez was not made lightly, as Volkov understood that the murder of an American military officer would dramatically increase the risks associated with his mission and would likely trigger intensive security investigations that could threaten the entire Soviet intelligence network in the region. However, the alternative of allowing Rodriguez to report the recruitment attempt was even more dangerous, as it would certainly result in the exposure and destruction of operations that had taken years to establish. The plan that Volkov developed to eliminate Rodriguez took advantage of the captain's predictable routine of traveling alone into the desert to conduct weapons testing at remote locations where security was minimal and where a disappearance could be explained as an accident or equipment failure. Volkov had learned about these solo testing trips through his observation of Rodriguez's activities and his sources within the local labor force that supported military operations at Fort Bliss. The desert testing sites that Rodriguez visited were located in some of the most remote and inhospitable terrain in North America, where temperatures could exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and where the vast distances and lack of landmarks made navigation extremely difficult even for experienced desert travelers. These conditions created opportunities for staging accidents that would be believable to investigators and that would make the recovery of evidence extremely difficult. Volkov's plan called for him to intercept Rodriguez at one of these remote testing sites and eliminate him in a way that would make his death appear to be the result of an accident, equipment malfunction, or the harsh environmental conditions of the desert. The isolation of these locations would ensure that there would be no witnesses to the crime, while the harsh conditions would help to destroy evidence and make forensic analysis difficult or impossible. The specific opportunity that Volkov chose to execute his plan came on the evening of September 15, 1943, when Rodriguez was scheduled to conduct a routine equipment check at a remote testing site approximately 30 miles southeast of El Paso. The location was isolated, the terrain was difficult, and Rodriguez would be traveling alone without any security escort or communication support that might interfere with Volkov's operation. The testing site that Rodriguez was visiting was designated as Location 7 in the Fort Bliss testing complex, a remote facility that was used for evaluating the accuracy and reliability of experimental artillery systems under field conditions. The site consisted of little more than a few temporary structures, some testing equipment, and target areas that were marked with flags and reference points for measuring the accuracy of artillery fire. Access to Location 7 required a drive of more than an hour through increasingly desolate terrain, following dirt roads that were barely maintained and that could become impassable during the occasional flash floods that swept through the desert during the summer monsoon season. The isolation of the site was considered an advantage for security purposes, as it made unauthorized access extremely difficult and reduced the risk of espionage or sabotage. Volkov's preparation for the assassination required careful planning and reconnaissance to ensure that he could reach the testing site without being detected and that he would have sufficient time to complete his mission and escape before Rodriguez's absence was noticed. He studied maps of the area, identified multiple routes to and from the testing site, and prepared equipment and supplies that would allow him to survive in the desert environment while avoiding detection. On the evening of September 15th, Rodriguez left Fort Bliss, driving a military vehicle loaded with testing equipment and technical manuals, following a route that would take him deep into the Chihuahuan desert to conduct what he believed would be a routine equipment evaluation. He carried with him detailed notes about the experimental artillery systems he was working on, as well as classified documents related to the targeting systems that represented some of America's most closely guarded military secrets. The journey from Fort Bliss to Location 7 took Rodriguez through a landscape that seemed to belong to another planet, where the familiar features of civilization gave way to an endless expanse of sand, rock, and sparse vegetation that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The road he followed was little more than a rough track that had been carved out by military vehicles and supply trucks, marked only by occasional signs and landmarks that guided authorized personnel to the various testing sites scattered throughout the region. Rodriguez's vehicle raised clouds of dust that hung in the still desert air long after he had passed, creating a visible trail that could be followed by anyone who knew what to look for. The sound of his engine carried for miles in the silence of the desert, announcing his presence to any observers who might be positioned along his route. Volkov had positioned himself at Location 7 several hours before Rodriguez's scheduled arrival, using his knowledge of the area and his experience in surveillance techniques to establish a position that would allow him to observe Rodriguez's activities while remaining hidden from view. He had approached the site from a different direction than the route that Rodriguez would follow, using terrain features and natural cover to conceal his presence and his vehicle. The equipment that Volkov carried with him included a rifle that he had obtained through his intelligence network, as well as other items that would allow him to stage the scene to appear as an accident rather than a deliberate killing. He also carried survival supplies that would allow him to remain in the desert for several days if necessary, and communication equipment that would allow him to contact his handlers if the operation encountered unexpected complications. When Rodriguez arrived at Location 7 and began setting up his equipment, Volkov watched from concealment to ensure that the captain was indeed alone and that there were no unexpected complications that might interfere with the assassination. Rodriguez went about his work methodically, apparently unaware that he was being observed and that his life was measured in minutes rather than hours. The testing equipment that Rodriguez was evaluating included experimental targeting systems that incorporated some of the most advanced technology available to the American military in 1943. These systems represented years of research and development by some of the country's most brilliant scientists and engineers, and their successful deployment would give American forces significant advantages in future battles against both German and Japanese forces. Rodriguez's work at the testing site involved calibrating these targeting systems and evaluating their performance under field conditions, a process that required careful attention to detail and precise measurements that would determine whether the systems were ready for operational deployment. The classified documents that he carried contained detailed technical specifications and performance data that would be invaluable to any foreign intelligence service seeking to develop competing technologies or effective countermeasures. The attack came without warning, as Rodriguez was bent over his equipment, concentrating on a technical problem that required his full attention. Volkov emerged from concealment and approached to within close range before Rodriguez became aware of his presence. The captain looked up in surprise, recognizing Volkov, but not immediately understanding the danger he faced. The confrontation between the two men was brief, as Rodriguez quickly realized that Volkov's presence at the remote testing site could not be coincidental, and that the Soviet agent represented a direct threat to his life and to American security. Rodriguez attempted to reach for his sidearm, but Volkov was faster and more prepared for violence. Volkov's shot was precise and professional, designed to kill instantly while leaving evidence that could support an alternate explanation for Rodriguez's death. The captain collapsed without a sound, his work interrupted permanently by a bullet that ended both his life and his contribution to America's war effort. After confirming that Rodriguez was dead, Volkov faced the challenge of disposing of the body and staging the scene to support his cover story. The plan he had developed called for Rodriguez's disappearance to be explained as the result of becoming lost in the desert, possibly after suffering an injury or equipment failure that prevented him from returning to base. The staging of the scene required Volkov to carefully manipulate the evidence at the testing site to support the story of an accidental disappearance. He moved Rodriguez's body to a location several miles from the testing site in a remote arroyo where flash flooding and natural erosion would help to conceal the grave and scatter any evidence that might be discovered by future searchers. The burial of Rodriguez's body required Volkov to work quickly and efficiently in the harsh desert environment, where the combination of extreme heat, shifting sand, and rocky terrain made the task both physically demanding and technically challenging. Volkov had chosen the burial site carefully, selecting a location in a narrow arroyo where seasonal flash floods would help to conceal the grave and where the natural erosion patterns would make any disturbance appear to be the result of natural processes rather than human activity. The arroyo where Volkov buried Rodriguez was typical of the drainage systems that crisscrossed the Chihuahuan Desert, carved by centuries of occasional but violent rainstorms that could transform dry creek beds into raging torrents within minutes. These natural features provided ideal locations for concealing evidence, as the powerful floods that occurred during the monsoon season could move enormous amounts of sand and debris, fundamentally altering the landscape and burying or exposing objects with equal facility. Volkov's burial technique was designed to take advantage of these natural processes while also ensuring that the grave would be deep enough and well concealed enough to prevent accidental discovery by future visitors to the area. He dug the grave to a depth of approximately 6 feet, using tools that he had brought specifically for this purpose, and then carefully covered the body with layers of sand and rock that would appear natural to casual observation. The personal effects and classified documents that Rodriguez had been carrying were buried with the body, as Volkov recognized that their disappearance, along with the captain, would support the theory of accidental death, while also preventing American authorities from recovering sensitive information that might reveal details about Soviet intelligence operations. The targeting system manuals and technical specifications that Rodriguez had been working on contained information that would be valuable to Soviet military planners, but Volkov's instructions were to eliminate the security threat rather than to capture intelligence materials. After completing the burial, Volkov turned his attention to staging the testing site to support his cover story about Rodriguez's disappearance. This required him to carefully arrange evidence that would suggest the captain had become confused or disoriented, possibly as a result of equipment failure or environmental factors, and had wandered off into the desert where he had become lost and died of exposure. The staging of Rodriguez's disappearance required Volkov to manipulate several different types of evidence at the testing site to create a coherent narrative that would satisfy investigators without raising suspicions about foreign involvement. He scattered some of Rodriguez's equipment to suggest confusion or disorientation, damaged the military vehicle to indicate possible mechanical problems, and created tire tracks and footprints that suggested Rodriguez had driven off in an unexpected direction before abandoning his vehicle and continuing on foot. The tire tracks that Volkov created were designed to suggest that Rodriguez had attempted to drive across difficult terrain, possibly in an effort to reach higher ground or find a landmark that would help him navigate back to the main road. These tracks led away from the testing site in a direction that would take a lost traveler deeper into the desert rather than toward civilization, supporting the theory that Rodriguez had become disoriented and made poor decisions that contributed to his death. The footprints that Volkov left around the abandoned vehicle were arranged to suggest that Rodriguez had spent considerable time walking around the area, possibly searching for landmarks or trying to determine his location. Some of these prints led away from the vehicle in various directions, creating the impression that Rodriguez had made several attempts to find his way before finally setting off in a direction that would prove fatal. The damage to Rodriguez's military vehicle was carefully calculated to suggest mechanical failure that might have contributed to his decision to abandon the vehicle and continue on foot. Volkov disabled the engine and damaged some of the cooling system components in ways that would appear to be the result of overheating or other mechanical problems that could occur in the harsh desert environment. The scattered equipment around the testing site was arranged to suggest that Rodriguez had been working normally before encountering problems that led to his disappearance. Some items were left in their normal positions, while others were displaced in ways that might indicate confusion, haste, or environmental factors such as wind or animals disturbing the site after Rodriguez's departure. When Rodriguez failed to return to Fort Bliss the following morning, his absence was initially attributed to the kind of equipment problems or minor accidents that were common in the harsh desert environment. It was not until the second day of his absence that serious concern began to develop and official search operations were initiated to determine his whereabouts. The search for Rodriguez involved extensive ground and air operations that covered thousands of square miles of desert terrain, using both military personnel and civilian volunteers who were familiar with the challenging conditions of the Chihuahuan Desert. The operation was complicated by the vast size of the search area, the extreme heat that made daytime operations dangerous for search teams, and the frequent dust storms that reduced visibility and made aerial reconnaissance difficult. The search teams that were deployed to locate Rodriguez included experienced desert trackers, military police investigators, and medical personnel who were trained to recognize the signs of death by exposure or dehydration that would be expected if Rodriguez had become lost in the desert. These teams were equipped with vehicles designed for desert travel, communications equipment for coordinating search efforts, and supplies that would allow them to operate in the field for extended periods. The searchers found Rodriguez's abandoned vehicle and the scattered equipment that Volkov had left to support his deception within the first day of the operation, confirming that the captain had reached his assigned testing site and had begun his work before encountering problems. The evidence at the site supported the theory that Rodriguez had experienced mechanical difficulties and had made the fatally poor decision to abandon his vehicle and attempt to reach civilization on foot. The tire tracks and footprints that Volkov had created were discovered and analyzed by experienced trackers who concluded that Rodriguez had indeed left the testing site on foot, heading in a direction that would take him deeper into the desert rather than toward the main road back to Fort Bliss. This evidence supported the theory that Rodriguez had become disoriented, possibly as a result of heat exhaustion or dehydration, and had made navigation errors that contributed to his death. The search operation expanded to follow the apparent trail left by Rodriguez, but the tracking became increasingly difficult as the search teams moved farther from the testing site into terrain that was more rugged and where environmental factors had begun to obscure the evidence of Rodriguez's passage. The combination of wind, shifting sand, and the passage of time had erased many of the tracks, making it impossible to determine Rodriguez's exact route or destination. Despite the intensive search efforts, no trace of Rodriguez himself was found during the initial operation. The search teams covered hundreds of square miles of desert terrain, checking every arroyo rock formation and area of vegetation where a lost traveler might have sought shelter or where a body might have been concealed by natural processes. The investigation into Rodriguez's disappearance was hampered by the vast size of the search area and the harsh conditions that made detailed examination of potential evidence extremely difficult. The intense heat, shifting sand, and frequent windstorms that characterized the desert environment meant that any traces of Rodriguez's movements would be quickly erased, and that his body could be hidden in any of thousands of remote locations throughout the region. Military investigators interviewed everyone who had been in contact with Rodriguez in the days before his disappearance, including Volkov, who presented himself as a concerned member of the Mexican-American community who had occasionally spoken with the captain about military service and patriotic duty. Volkov's performance during the investigation was masterful, displaying appropriate concern about Rodriguez's fate while providing information that subtly supported the theory of accidental disappearance. The interview between Volkov and military investigators took place at Fort Bliss, several days after Rodriguez's disappearance, in a routine questioning session that was designed to gather information about the captain's state of mind and recent activities. Volkov portrayed himself as a hard-working laborer who had admired Rodriguez as a role model for the Mexican-American community and who was shocked and saddened by the captain's disappearance. During the interview, Volkov provided information about his conversations with Rodriguez that painted a picture of a dedicated officer who was committed to his work, but who had expressed some concerns about the dangers of conducting testing operations in the remote desert environment. This information supported the investigators' theory that Rodriguez had been aware of the risks associated with his work, but had underestimated the specific dangers he faced on the night of his disappearance. Volkov's responses to questions about Rodriguez's personal life and mental state were carefully crafted to support the accidental death theory, while avoiding any suggestions that might lead investigators to consider other explanations for the captain's disappearance. He described Rodriguez as a stable, responsible individual who was devoted to his family and his military duties, but who might have been overconfident about his ability to handle emergency situations in the desert. The information that Volkov provided during his interview was consistent with what other witnesses had told investigators about Rodriguez's character and recent behavior, creating a coherent picture that supported the official conclusion that the captain had died as a result of becoming lost in the desert. This consistency was crucial for maintaining the credibility of Volkov's cover identity and preventing suspicions that might have led to more intensive investigation of his background and activities. As weeks passed without any trace of Rodriguez, the official investigation began to focus on the possibility that he had become lost in the desert and died of exposure, dehydration, or other natural causes. This theory was supported by the harsh conditions of the search area, the evidence found at the testing site, and the fact that even experienced desert travelers could easily become disoriented in the vast featureless landscape of the Chihuahuan Desert. The classification of Rodriguez's disappearance as a presumed accidental death was devastating to his family in San Antonio, but it was also convenient for military authorities who were eager to avoid any suggestion that security breaches or enemy action might have been involved in the loss of an officer with access to highly classified information. The official position was that Rodriguez had died in the line of duty while conducting important military research, and he was awarded posthumous honors that recognized his service and sacrifice. The memorial service that was held for Rodriguez at Fort Bliss was attended by hundreds of military personnel, community leaders, and members of the Mexican-American community who had known and respected the captain. The service emphasized Rodriguez's dedication to his country and his sacrifice in service of the war effort, while also acknowledging the tragedy of his loss and the impact it would have on his family and community. For Rodriguez's parents, Miguel and Carmen, the loss of their son was made even more painful by the uncertainty surrounding his fate and the knowledge that his body had not been recovered for proper burial. They had sacrificed and worked to give Daniel the education and opportunities that had made his military career possible, and his death seemed to rob their struggles of meaning and purpose. The family held a memorial service in San Antonio that was attended by hundreds of friends, neighbors, and fellow Mexican Americans who had followed Daniel's career with pride and who saw his success as evidence that immigrants and their children could achieve great things in American society. The service included readings from Scripture, testimonials from former teachers and colleagues, and a presentation of the flag that had flown over Fort Bliss in Daniel's honor. The medals and recognition that Rodriguez received posthumously were presented to his parents in a ceremony at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, where military officials spoke about the captain's contributions to the war effort and his sacrifice in service of his country. The ceremony was covered by local newspapers and radio stations, providing recognition for Rodriguez's service while also serving as an example for other Mexican-American families whose sons were serving in the military. Meanwhile, Volkov continued his intelligence operations in the El Paso region, taking advantage of the successful elimination of the threat that Rodriguez had represented to expand his activities and gather additional information about American weapons development programs. The murder had demonstrated his effectiveness and ruthlessness to his Soviet handlers, leading to increased resources and expanded mission parameters that allowed him to pursue larger objectives. The success of Volkov's operation against Rodriguez provided him with enhanced credibility within the Soviet intelligence hierarchy and led to his assignment to additional targets and objectives in the El Paso region. His demonstrated ability to eliminate security threats while maintaining his cover identity made him a valuable asset for operations that required both intelligence gathering and direct action capabilities. The intelligence reports that Volkov transmitted to Moscow included not only information about American artillery technology and testing procedures, but also detailed assessments of security measures, personnel vulnerabilities, and opportunities for future infiltration and sabotage operations. His success in eliminating Rodriguez without detection had proven that Soviet agents could operate with near impunity in the American Southwest, a lesson that would have profound implications for future intelligence operations. The information that Volkov provided about American weapons development programs was particularly valuable to Soviet military planners who were already beginning to prepare for the post-war competition with the United States. The technical specifications and performance data that he gathered helped Soviet scientists and engineers understand the capabilities and limitations of American artillery systems, information that would be crucial for developing competing technologies and effective countermeasures. Volkov's continued success as an intelligence operative was facilitated by the complete absence of suspicion about Rodriguez's death and the lack of any investigation into possible foreign involvement in his disappearance. The case had been closed as an accidental death, with no evidence of foul play or security breach that might have prompted a broader examination of personnel with access to sensitive information. The security implications of Rodriguez's death were not fully understood by American authorities at the time, as the official explanation of accidental death prevented any systematic review of the circumstances that had led to his assignment to sensitive projects or the procedures that were used to protect classified information. This lack of investigation allowed other security vulnerabilities to persist and potentially be exploited by foreign intelligence services. As 1943 gave way to 1944, Volkov received new instructions from Moscow that expanded his mission beyond intelligence gathering to include active measures designed to disrupt American weapons development and reduce the effectiveness of military research programs. These operations required even greater care and sophistication to avoid detection while maximizing their impact on American military capabilities. The sabotage activities that Volkov conducted were subtle and difficult to detect. designed to appear as equipment failures, research setbacks, or human error, rather than deliberate acts of foreign interference. He arranged for critical components to fail